Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be taking a trip down the heart of the state between Fort Myers and Arcadia and the Seminole Gulf's Desoto line. Now we'll be chasing the southbound and the northbound version of this train, something that occurs only on weekdays about 2 times a week. So I'd head down Sunday night in preparation to be up early on Monday.
On the way south to Northport, where I'd be staying, I'd stumble upon Amtrak 92, meeting up with a friend in the process. This day, the northbound Silver Star would be making great time, approaching Tampa seen here between Mango and AY, running 12 minutes early. What was a novelty just 6 months ago is now the norm, with an ALC Charger leading the way.
71353 Main South, there, 7500.
The next morning, we'd be up early, taking US 17 to Arcadia, where we'd commence the southbound chase of today's Seminole Gulf train. Arriving just before 8 a.m., the crew would be on duty, already shuffling around cars in their yard here. At one point, part of the Charlotte Harbor and Northern's Bradley to Arcadia main line, built in 1909, completed a year later. Now the very southern portion of CSX's Brewster subdivision out of the Bone Valley, Seminole Gulf's trackage begins at the interchange known as Morgan Park at West Hickory Street. Acquired in 1987 from CSX, the Seminole Gulf has been running trains on this line ever since November 1st of that year, still a weekday occurrence now in broad daylight. Back in its heyday, Arcadia was served by 3 railroads: the East and West Coast Railway, a seaboard subsidiary with trackage west out of Bradenton, the Charlotte Harbor and Northern, which is what we're looking at, and the ACL with the ex-Florida Southern trackage built in 1885 from Bartow down to Punta Gorda. The ACL's depot in downtown Arcadia still resides peacefully, restored to its original state now used as office space for a handful of downtown businesses. An old semaphore still guards the old depot, although trackage was ripped out decades ago. The intact portion of the old ACL begins at the curve at Pine Street and US 17, running south all the way to the other end of the 62-mile line at Fort Myers. The line used to continue all the way to Marco Island via Bonita Springs and Naples, although that's been abandoned since 1942. From here in Arcadia, the entirety of Seminole Gulf's line is ex-ACL trackage, starting right at US 17, where the Seaboard's connection track from the yard turns onto their once rival railroad's parallel route. We'd set up right at the curve as this morning's southbound turn departs for Fort Myers. The power on today's train would be 2 GE standard cab models, the leader number 593, a B39-8E with 598, a B40-8 trailing second. As cool as it is to see such old and somewhat rare locomotives in such a unique paint scheme, this is the most common for Seminole Gulf down here, with their only high-cap engines being on the Sarasota branch about 50 miles over west. Just south a couple crossings on the old ACL, and we've already reached our first customer, known as the zipper track to the crew. This transload facility isn't switched every day, but according to my guide Cooper, it's starting to become busier and busier, today with a healthy cut of hoppers to be switched out. The operation would begin as the crew cut off their first hopper from the train and passed the switch. They'd back into the zipper moments later, pulling out 9 empties, which will be taken down to Fort Myers before being brought back up here to Arcadia for interchange with CSX. After backing the empties onto the train, it's time to spot the singular load for the customer on their spur. Parking the load about halfway down the spur, the conductor would tie down its handbrakes and uncouple, now prepared to be reunited with the rest of their train sitting on the main. We'd head out and back onto US 17 as the crew prepared to continue south, pulling off at Los Pinos Road just south of town for the next shot. Here the bright morning sun would coat the colorful train as it rolls south out of the shade of a few nearby oak trees. Back onto US 17 we'd go, passing the small town of Nocatee in the process, beating the train to Southwest Wood Street by about 5 minutes, more than enough time to get the drone up. This is what most of the landscape looks like down here, lots of oak trees with an occasional clearing or farm. Trackage here naturally runs southwest along US 17, which makes for an easy chase, but one that can get mundane fairly quickly. Into Fort Ogden, turning onto back roads to find our next spot. Like many towns in this area, Fort Ogden is a jumble of houses, a church, and a spur on the railroad. More trains loading is done on the old Fort Ogden house track in the middle of town, once much busier with a depot and a railway express agency. Back in the early 20th century, Fort Ogden was yet another junction town, as the SAL's main broke out to Ft Myers to the south and Boca Grande to the west and the coast along the Gulf. On the ACL, this is where their Sarasota branch connected, running through the heart of the Myakka River State Park. We'd share the shade with some birds next to the town's small but picturesque community church as the southbound turn comes to a stop to begin their switching here. One constant on any summer railfanning trip is as long as there's no storms, the heat will melt you. So we'd take the time given to us to head to a nearby gas station for some water and Gatorade. Since the train would be switching for the next 25 minutes or so, we'd have plenty of time for our refreshments and locating our next photo spot. Down Turback Road and a short walk down to the tracks, we get to a small trestle that Seminole Gulf maintains over a branch of Hunter Creek, stemming from the notable Peace River. This is at milepost AX 929 on the timetable, just 2 crossings prior to the bridge over Shell Creek. Speaking of Shell Creek, here's the train seen at the last public access point on the line prior to the bridge over the waterway. Shell Creek, like Hunter Creek, splits out from the larger Peace River out of the Charlotte Bay, known as the Charlotte Harbor, which was originally one of the main reasons treks are here in the first place. The bay was busy enough to warrant its own railroad, which is now the northern portion of this line and a crucial part in the present-day Bone Valley. Now over Shell Creek, we're on the banks of the Peace River at Cleveland, where I'd set up within one of many industrial parks in the area. Here on Confederation Drive, an old spurred track used for unloading lumber now hosts some of Seminole Gulf's maintenance of way equipment, stored up here around milepost 933 for the season. Four miles south by west is Punta Gorda, a town settled back in 1887, now home to 20,000 residents and a couple of industries still served by the daily local. Punta Gorda is a noteworthy and popular shot on the line for its ACL depot still in great shape. The Neo-Spanish architecture used for the 1928 built depot was one of only 6 built by the ACL, its look-alike relative being restored as well in Bradenton. Working your way into Punta Gorda, the chase can quickly become a lot more interesting with the amount of lights, intersections, and traffic the town hosts. This is where it's nice to have a local like Cooper behind the wheel who'd get us to US 41, which would give us the chance to get ahead south of town. Setting up first at Taylor Road, the sun would be just about right for the next few crossings, so we'd use the parallel Royal Road to our advantage, getting roll-bys at 2 more spots before rejoining US 41 at Tucker's Grade. For the next 12 miles or so, the tracks parallel I-75 towards Fort Myers and the Caloosahatchee. Just a couple miles west of this is US 41, our route for beating the train to Oil Well Road, another popular spot for its overpass and views of the tracks for miles each way. Reminders of the line's past remain on nearby construction, like the very bridge we're standing on. For these markings, this organized stack of concrete predates the Reagan administration and the 1980s as a whole. Down south another few miles is Slater Road, where a similar shot to Oil Well is possible by another overpass that crosses the old SEL and the interstate. It'd be almost 2 hours until we'd see the train again, as its main commerce on the line, located just north of Fort Myers called Bayshore, can suck trains in and spit them out hours apart. We'll see more of that operation in tomorrow's chase, but for now, I'm waist deep in the Caloosahatchee River watching the southbound turn cross the bridge, only completed just a handful of months ago, connecting Fort Myers with the rest of the rail world after Hurricane Ian's devastating campaign through here. Now at the north end of town at an area known as Tice on the timetable, our train would be rocking past milepost 961 at track speed. Seen here from the freight loading platform now long abandoned, located off Tarpon and Railroad Street. From here to the yard, the crew wouldn't see us, as we'd break off and head back to Northport for the afternoon. It'd be quite a good chase on this day, and tomorrow we plan to retrace our steps right back north. Next morning, we'd be up early once again, checking out the railroad's locomotive shops and storage area down at the south end of the line in Fort Myers. The best way to see their equipment up close and without trespassing is taking a walk down the Yarborough Linear Trail. Used by bikers and pedestrians alike, the paved trail runs between Fort Myers Airport and right next to Seminole Gulf's yard. Lots of equipment is here, including more GE standard cab switchers and the railroad's passenger train, used for their well-known murder mystery dinner train. With the sun now above the horizon, we'd set up along Winkler Avenue as the crew brought up the power for today's northbound train by us and into their Fort Myers yard just north of us. Down there near that brick building is where the dinner train is parked to unload and unload passengers, utilizing the Central Point Plaza as customer parking. Just before 9 a.m., the crew was departing Fort Myers with a healthy train for Arcadia and points north, with the 597 leading the way now. We'd set up at the photogenic South Street curve where a few spurs break out of the main to various industries, occasionally worked by the railroad's second train, the Fort Myers Switcher. Out from the traffic light garden that is Fort Myers, we'd beat the train to the Caloosahatchee River, where we'd catch it going over the 3 bridges that takes the railroad over the crucial waterway. Back in 1881, the Caloosahatchee flooded enough to pose a threat to residents of Fort Myers, so a man named Hamilton Diston would create a plan to protect the surrounding cities by building a 67-mile canal that would connect the river inland to Lake Okeechobee. Nowadays, the canal drains rural areas south and west of Fort Myers to Florida's largest lake, being part of the lake's massive system of waterways, which preserves the natural swamp that is the Everglades. North on the line a few miles and we're back at Bayshore as the crew wraps up their job here. From the air, you can get a better vantage of how the crew utilizes their 2 engines for maximum efficiency. Although we'd only see the end of it, the operation here at Bayshore is interesting because of its amount of customers and lack of track to work with. After about 2 hours again here, the 597 would couple back onto the train with the 593 and start north again. We catch the train easily once again at Oil Well Road as it parallels I-75 in the fairly good noontime light. Many times I've driven by here hoping to see a train, and now I can say I have as the northbound turn trundles along. Now close to the south side of Punta Gorda, we're at a spot the railroad calls Ackline, a unique area where commercial industries and condos share the same zip code. We pull off at Tribune Boulevard as our train stops in preparation to switch the feed mill here, where a dozen or more hoppers can be unloaded daily. Today the crew would be pulling out all 12 from the spur and replacing 8 of them with loads, an operation that would take about 30 minutes. We'd see the beginning of it, but would pull away before the train continued north in order to get a shot with the sign I'd seen the day prior. After a bit of a late start this day out of Fort Myers, we'd capture the train entering Punta Gorda just after 1 p.m., with still a good dealing of switching to do. Now into Punta Gorda, we'd be treated badly with the drivers in this area, as we beat the train to the depot now for a shot looking south. Setting up here, I would begin thinking of how to explain what a pain it is to chase a train through towns with horrible drivers when the joke would write itself. For the record, the engineer would later ask me for this clip of the idiot in the gray Tiguan almost losing his bumper. With an almost 3-hour drive back home to Lutz, I'd settle for one last shot of the train now in Cleveland, passing under US 17, now kicking it up as they approach Shell Creek. This is where our adventure would end after 2 solid days of chasing the Seminole Gulf. A huge thanks to all of you who would stay for the end of this one. The viewership I've been getting recently is astounding, only motivating me to make more videos with better quality. But until that next video comes along, I'll catch you trackside next time. This is Christian from Multicolor Films, end of transmission.